Jack Mitchell was not a morning person. He barely functioned without his coffee, and today was no exception. He groggily shuffled toward his kitchen, eager for the first sip of caffeine. But just as he reached for his mug, something outside the window caught his eye, making his brain jolt awake faster than any espresso shot ever could. There, inside his garage, where his car was supposed to be, sat a bright pink SUV. Jack blinked in disbelief. Had he been robbed? Did the thief have an incredibly bizarre taste in vehicles? Or worse, had he somehow sleepwalked into a dealership and made the world's most regrettable impulse buy? His confusion quickly turned to frustration as he recognized the vehicle. It belonged to his neighbor, Karen Whitmore. At first, Jack thought it must have been a mistake. Maybe she had accidentally parked in his garage, though that in itself seemed impossible. But how had she even gotten in? The garage door had been closed the night before, and he certainly hadn't given anyone his code. With a growing sense of irritation, Jack stepped outside in his slippers, the morning air biting at his skin as he knocked on Karen's door. No answer. He knocked again, this time with more force. Resisting the urge to pound his fist into the wood, he waited. Finally, the door swung open, revealing Karen draped in a silk robe, a coffee mug in one hand and her phone in the other. She looked at Jack with a mix of impatience and mild amusement, as if he were some unwanted solicitor interrupting her morning routine. "Morning, Jack," she said, taking a slow sip of coffee. "What's up?" Jack pointed toward his garage, his voice laced with disbelief. "Karen, why is your car in my garage?" She tilted her head as if he had just asked why the sky was blue. "Oh, that," she said with a chuckle. "I needed somewhere to park for a few days. My driveway is full." Jack's jaw dropped. "So you just what? Broke into my garage and helped yourself?" Karen rolled her eyes. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. I didn't break in. Your garage was open yesterday when I was walking by, so I figured you wouldn't mind." Jack felt a vein in his forehead pulse. "You figured I wouldn't mind?" "Karen, you can't just leave your car in my garage without asking." She waved a dismissive hand, as if you were making a mountain out of a molehill. "It's not like you're using all that space. I'll move it in a few days." "A few days?" Jack's voice rose. "Karen, I want it out of there today." She sighed dramatically as if she were the one being inconvenienced. Okay, relax. I'll get it later. I have some errands to run first." That seemed reasonable until later turned into tomorrow, and tomorrow turned into, "I'll get to it when I can." By the third day, Jack's patience had evaporated like mist on a hot sidewalk. He had tried calling, texting, even knocking on her door again. But she was a ghost. Meanwhile, her pink SUV sat smugly in his garage, like an unwanted house guest who refused to leave. Jack started considering his options. Could he push it out himself? Probably not. Could he call the cops? Maybe, but it felt excessive. By the time a full week had passed, his own car was trapped in the driveway, exposed to the elements, while Karen's vehicle enjoyed the luxury of indoor parking. Jack's irritation turned into full-blown rage when he realized Karen wasn't avoiding him out of guilt. She was avoiding him because she knew exactly what she was doing. And that was the final straw. That evening, Jack sat on his porch, his phone in hand, waiting. A neighbor, Greg, who had stopped by to borrow a drill, raised an eyebrow as Jack explained the situation. Greg let out a low whistle. "Oh yeah, she was talking about it at the HOA meeting the other day," he said. "Said you two had a mutual agreement or something. Even joked that you should start charging her rent." Jack stared at him, stunned. "She what?" Greg shrugged. "You know Karen. She just assumes she can do whatever she wants." Jack clenched his jaw. If Karen wasn't going to move her car willingly, he'd move it for her. He pulled out his phone and dialed the number for a local towing company. It was time for Karen to learn a lesson. The moment Jack spotted Karen walking down the street, completely oblivious to the storm she was about to walk into, he leaned back in his chair, waiting. She was laughing into her phone, probably gossiping about another neighbor. But when she saw the tow truck backing into Jack's driveway, her expression transformed from smug amusement to pure horror. She sprinted the last few steps toward him, waving her arms frantically. Whoa, whoa, whoa. What do you think you're doing?" Jack didn't even bother standing up. "I warned you, Karen. I gave you a week. You can't just tow my car," she shrieked. "That's theft." Jack raised an eyebrow. "No, Karen. You know what's theft? Taking someone's garage without permission." Her mouth opened, and closed like a fish gasping for air. I was going to move it. Jack gestured toward the tow truck driver, who was already securing her vehicle. Well, you better tell them where you want it delivered, because it's leaving tonight. Karen stomped her foot like a spoiled child. You're going to regret this, Jack. Jack let out a laugh. Oh, I don't think so. As the tow truck slowly crawled down the street, Karen ran after it, still shouting threats and protests. Jack leaned back in his chair, taking a deep breath of satisfaction. His garage was finally his again. Little did he know, Karen wasn't done causing trouble yet. Jack woke up the next morning feeling triumphant. His garage was finally his again, and Karen had learned her lesson. Or so he thought. As he stepped outside to grab his newspaper, he noticed something that made his stomach tighten with dread. A large, boldly printed note was taped to his front door. You've made a big mistake. Expect payback. Jack exhaled sharply. Oh, for the love of. Before he could finish the thought, a loud crash from his backyard made him spin around. His trash cans were knocked over, garbage strewn across the lawn. Worse yet, his neatly trimmed hedges had been hacked to bits, looking like a crime scene from a low-budget horror movie. Karen. Jack clenched his fists. This was beyond childish, it was outright sabotage. Jack wasn't the type to back down from a fight, but this was escalating fast. He decided it was time to go on the offensive. First stop, the Homeowners Association office. The HOA president, Richard Holloway, greeted him with a smile that dripped with insincerity. Ah, Mr. Mitchell, Richard said smoothly. What brings you in today? Jack placed his hands on the desk, leaning forward. I want to file a complaint. Karen Whitmore has been harassing me, and now she's vandalizing my property. Richard clicked his tongue. Now, let's not jump to conclusions. Karen is a long-standing member of this community. Jack's brow furrowed. And I'm not? I've been here 6 years. Richard sighed theatrically. Jack, these sorts of disputes should be handled neighbor to neighbor. The HOA can't get involved in every little. Jack scoffed. Her car was in my garage for a week, and now she's trashing my property. If the HOA won't do anything, I'll take this to the police. Richard's fake smile flickered for the briefest second before returning. That won't be necessary. Let's see what we can do. Jack didn't trust him. Not for a second. Jack soon discovered that Karen wasn't just a nuisance. She was part of something bigger. Digging into the HOA records, he uncovered some shady dealings. Turns out, Karen and Richard were closely tied, and she had been getting away with violations for years. Late fees? Waived. Parking violations? Ignored. Unpaid HOA dues. Mysteriously erased. Jack felt his blood boil. She wasn't just entitled, she was protected. But he had proof now, and he was going to use it. Jack knew he couldn't just sit on this information. If Karen and Richard were involved in some kind of HOA corruption scheme, he needed to expose them. But he also knew that confronting them directly was a dangerous move. People like them didn't play fair. He decided to start small, a warning shot. That evening, Jack sent an anonymous email to the entire neighborhood, attaching copies of the HOA records he had found. He kept the message simple. Your HOA fees are being used to cover personal favors. Demand accountability. Demand change. Within minutes, his inbox exploded with responses. The next morning, Jack awoke to an even bigger disaster than before. Someone had egged his house. The front of his garage door was covered in spray-painted insults. And his mailbox? Smashed to pieces. Jack didn't need a detective to tell him who was behind it. Karen. As he surveyed the damage, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Greg, his neighbor. Greg, you might want to check the HOA website. Karen's got a statement up. It's bad. Jack rushed inside and pulled up the site. There, in bold letters, was a public announcement from Karen. Beware of neighborhood scammers. It has come to my attention that certain individuals are spreading false accusations about our beloved HOA and its hard-working board members. These lies are meant to stir up drama and divide our community. Do not be fooled by their desperate attempts to cause chaos. Stay informed. Stay united. Jack's blood boiled. She was playing the victim. Fine. If she wanted a fight, she'd get one. Jack didn't waste time. He gathered more evidence, transaction logs, old complaints that had been ignored, and even testimonies from other neighbors who had been targeted by Karen and Richard's favoritism. Then, he did the one thing Karen wasn't expecting. He filed an official complaint with the county housing authority. HOAs might have a lot of power, but even they had to answer to state regulators. Within days, investigators arrived in the neighborhood. Karen tried to brush it off as unnecessary interference and a misunderstanding, but the audit reports spoke for themselves. Thousands of dollars in misused funds. Dozens of fabricated fines against residents Karen didn't like. An entire side business ran out of HOA funds. The walls were closing in. At the next HOA meeting, Karen and Richard sat at the front of the room, visibly sweating as the state investigators read off their findings. Given the overwhelming evidence of mismanagement, financial misconduct, and fraudulent activities, we recommend a full dissolution of the current HOA leadership and potential legal action. The room erupted. Karen jumped to her feet. This is a witch hunt. You're all just jealous. Richard tried to remain composed. We need to be reasonable. But the neighbors weren't having it. Greg stood up. We demand a vote to remove Karen and Richard immediately. The vote was unanimous. Karen and Richard were officially out. Days later, Jack stood on his porch, watching as Karen's pink SUV was towed away. This time, not from his garage, but because she had refused to pay her own HOA fines. Richard, meanwhile, was under investigation for fraud and facing potential criminal charges. As for the neighborhood, it was finally free. Greg walked over, handing Jack a beer. You did it, man. You took them down. Jack chuckled. Yeah, but next time, I'm just putting up a no parking sign. They clinked bottles, watching as Hollow Creek finally returned to the peaceful neighborhood it was meant to be.